The war room at the forward operating base felt colder than usual, though the desert night outside still carried the day's heat. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sharp shadows across a digital map projected onto the far wall. Commander Nathan Hayes of the United States Navy SEALs stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes locked on the image of a heavily fortified compound near a hostile coastline. Satellite feeds rotated slowly on the screen: guard towers, patrol paths, reinforced gates, thermal signatures shifting behind concrete walls. High-value target codename Falcon, Hayes began, voice even and controlled. Former weapons financier. He's hosting a closed-door meeting tonight. We believe he's finalizing a shipment that cannot leave that compound. The men around the table didn't react outwardly. They rarely did. Years of training had carved their emotions into disciplined silence, but every one of them understood the weight behind the words. Across the room stood Lieutenant Emily Carter, intelligence liaison, temporarily attached to Hayes' unit. She wasn't in standard SEAL gear tonight. Her uniform bore the subtle differences of her branch, but she carried herself with the same steady focus. A tablet rested in her hands, streams of data scrolling across the screen. She had been embedded with Hayes' team for 3 months, long enough to learn their rhythms, long enough to know when something felt off. Surveillance drones confirm increased external patrols, she added, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, clear. This isn't routine security. They're expecting trouble. Hayes glanced at her briefly, just a flicker, but it was enough. He respected her instincts. She didn't speak unless it mattered. Window, one of the operators asked. 12 minutes, Hayes replied. Infiltrate by sea, breach from the eastern wall, extract the target before reinforcements mobilize from inland positions. Carter zoomed in on the map. There's a blind sector here, she said, circling a section of the courtyard. Thermal coverage drops every 90 seconds. That's your entry gap. The room grew quiet again. Hayes studied the blind spot. And what aren't we seeing? Carter hesitated just slightly. Underground access tunnels are possible. We haven't confirmed them, but the architecture suggests older infrastructure beneath the compound. A murmur shifted through the team. Hayes nodded slowly. So we assume there are tunnels. He turned to his men. We move fast, we move clean. If this turns noisy, we adapt. Standard contingencies apply. The meeting broke with sharp efficiency. Chairs slid back. Gear bags were lifted. Weapons were checked. Carter remained by the screen, staring at the compound. Hayes approached quietly. You don't like it. It wasn't a question. She exhaled slowly. It's too tight. Patrol patterns shifted 6 hours ago. That's reactive. Either someone tipped them off or they're baiting. Hayes studied the image again. Concrete walls, metal gates, shadows between structures. Intel doesn't support a leak, he said. Intel rarely admits it, she replied softly. For a moment they stood in silence. Outside, the distant thrum of helicopters echoed faintly across the base. Hayes finally nodded. You're coming with us. She looked at him, slightly surprised. Sir. You see patterns my team doesn't. If there's a shift on the ground, I want you there to call it. She understood what he wasn't saying. If it went wrong, she'd be inside the blast radius with them. I'll gear up, she said simply. Preparation moved with ritual precision. In the armory, operators checked suppressors, optics, and ammunition. Kevlar plates slid into carriers. Radios were tested in low murmurs. Carter fitted her own vest carefully, hands steady despite the pulse quickening beneath her ribs. She had been in hostile zones before. She had heard gunfire, felt explosions shake buildings. But this mission felt different. She approached one of the operators adjusting his night vision mount. What's your read? She asked quietly. He shrugged. Smells like a trap. Why? He gave a half smile. Because it's never this easy. Across the bay, Hayes conducted final checks. He moved with quiet authority, ensuring every detail aligned. He paused beside Carter. "You've done this before," he said. "Yes, sir." "Then you know the rule." She nodded. "Trust the team." He met her eyes. "And trust yourself." That lingered longer than either expected. The helicopters waited on the tarmac under dim lights. Rotor blades began spinning slowly, building toward a roar that swallowed conversation. The team boarded in practiced order. Carter strapped into her seat across from Hayes. Red interior lights washed the cabin in a blood-colored glow. No one spoke during liftoff. The aircraft tilted forward, racing toward open water. Carter adjusted her headset and monitored live drone feeds. The compound appeared again on her small screen, silent from above, deceptively calm. "Patrol shift in 30 seconds, she said into the comm. Hayes gave a subtle hand signal to his team. As the helicopter moved over the coastline, the ocean below looked endless and black, reflecting nothing back. Carter's stomach tightened. She zoomed in on the courtyard blind spot again. There. A flicker. "Hold," she muttered. Hayes looked up. "What is it?" "Thermal spike near the eastern wall. Just one, could be nothing." "Could be something," he replied. The helicopter banked away from radar range. They would finish the approach by sea. The ramp lowered, wind slamming into the cabin. One by one, the SEALs fast-roped down to the waiting boats below. Carter followed, boots hitting the deck harder than she expected. Salt spray struck her face as the rigid-hull boats cut through dark waves toward the compound shoreline. No turning back now. As they approached the extraction point, Hayes raised a fist. Engines cut. Silence rushed in. The compound stood 100 meters ahead. Dark. Waiting. Carter scanned the walls through night optics. The blind patrol sector approached. "Now," she whispered. The team moved. They scaled the eastern barrier swiftly, vanishing over the wall like shadows dissolving into deeper shadow. Inside the courtyard, everything felt wrong. Too still. No guards crossing. No footsteps. Hayes crouched behind a low structure, signaling positions. Carter's pulse thundered in her ears. Her instincts screamed. She keyed her mic softly. "Commander, the thermal spike is back." "Where?" "North corner, elevated position." Hayes turned slightly. That was when the first shot cracked through the night air. The sound shattered the silence like glass. And in that single violent second, Carter understood. They hadn't walked into a simple extraction. They had walked into an ambush. The first shot didn't miss by chance. It missed because the shooter had rushed it. The round snapped past Hayes' shoulder and ricocheted off stone, showering sparks into the courtyard. In the same breath, the silence collapsed into chaos. "Contact north corner," one of the SEALs barked. Muzzle flashes erupted from the elevated balcony Carter had flagged seconds earlier. Hayes reacted instantly, dragging one operator behind cover while signaling a split maneuver. Suppressed rifles answered with sharp, disciplined bursts. The shooter disappeared in a spray of concrete dust. But the compound was no longer still. Lights flickered on across the inner buildings. Doors burst open. Armed figures flooded the courtyard from two directions. "They were waiting," Carter said into her mic, breath steady despite the surge of adrenaline. Her tablet streamed thermal overlays from the circling drone overhead. Red silhouettes multiplied across her screen. Multiple heat signatures, west corridor, ground level, and rooftop access. "Copy," Hayes responded calmly. Too calmly, that was his gift. "Alpha team suppress west corridor. Bravo with me." Gunfire echoed violently off the compound walls, amplifying the sound into a thunderous roar. Carter moved low and fast behind a stone planter, adjusting the drone's angle. Through her earpiece, She fed real-time movement updates. 3 moving toward your 6, Commander, behind the transport truck. Hayes pivoted, firing controlled shots before the enemy could flank. 2 figures dropped. The third retreated behind cover. Explosions rocked the southern gate. Reinforcements were trying to seal them inside. "They're closing exits," Carter warned. "Outer gate is being reinforced." "Then we don't use the gate," Hayes replied. "Target building." She zoomed in on the main structure. Second floor, east wing. Heat concentration matches Falcon's profile. "Move." The team advanced in tight formation, clearing angles with lethal precision. Carter followed just behind Hayes, her boots skidding briefly on scattered debris. A bullet struck the wall inches from her head, spraying fragments into her cheek. She didn't flinch. Inside the main building, the air was thick with dust and smoke. The hallway lights flickered as if the structure itself were nervous. "Stairwell ahead," an operator whispered. "Thermals show 2 above you," Carter said quickly, holding position at the landing. Hayes nodded once and signaled a flashbang. The detonation was blinding and deafening in the confined space. The team surged upward immediately after, short bursts of gunfire. 2 bodies crumpled against the railing. They pushed into the second-floor corridor. That's when Carter noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Commander," she said sharply, "heat signatures below us moving fast, basement level." Hayes' jaw tightened. "Tunnels." The floor beneath them trembled as a blast erupted somewhere below. Dust cascaded from the ceiling tiles. "They're trying to collapse the structure," Carter realized, "or trap us upstairs." Hayes keyed his mic. "Falcon's in the east wing. We grab him now." They moved down the corridor, clearing rooms in rapid sequence. The 5th door on the right was reinforced steel, different from the rest. "Thermals confirm. 3 inside," Carter said. "Breaching charge placed," Countdown whispered. The explosion blew the door inward in a violent cloud of smoke and splinters. Inside, Falcon scrambled behind a heavy desk, shouting in panic. 2 guards opened fire blindly. The SEALs responded with precise, devastating efficiency. Within seconds, the guards were down. Falcon froze, trembling, hands raised. "Package secured," Hayes confirmed. But before relief could settle, Carter's voice cut through again. "Multiple hostiles ascending both stairwells. At least 8, fast." Gunfire erupted from the hallway behind them almost immediately. Rounds punched through drywall, shredding furniture. "They're boxing us in," one operator muttered. Hayes scanned the room. Windows overlooked the courtyard 2 stories below, too far to drop without injury. The corridor was filling with enemies. Carter's eyes darted across her tablet. Then she saw it. "North wall," she said urgently. "There's a maintenance shaft behind that shelving unit. It connects to the older infrastructure I warned about." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Move it." 2 operators shoved the heavy shelf aside, revealing a narrow metal hatch. Gunfire chewed into the walls as they worked. Falcon was zip-tied and shoved toward the opening. "Ladies first," Hayes told Carter. She gave him a look, not funny. Another explosion rocked the corridor as the enemy tried to breach inward. Carter climbed into the shaft, boots hitting a rusted ladder that descended into darkness. The air smelled of damp earth and oil. The team followed quickly, dragging Falcon with them. Hayes dropped in last, sealing the hatch just as bullets tore through the room above. They descended 20 feet into a cramped underground tunnel reinforced with aging concrete. The sound of footsteps thundered overhead. "They'll find the shaft," Carter warned. "Then we don't stay long," Hayes replied. The tunnel forked ahead, one direction sloping toward the coastline, the other deeper inland. Carter checked her map overlay. "Coast route leads near our insertion point, but if they know about the tunnels—" "They do," Hayes finished. From behind them came the metallic clang of the hatch being forced open. "They're in," someone hissed. Gunfire erupted down the narrow tunnel, flashes lighting the confined space like lightning in a cave. The noise was deafening. "Move," Hayes ordered. They sprinted toward the coastal route, boots splashing through shallow water pooled along the tunnel floor. Carter stayed just behind Hayes, heart pounding, breath sharp in her lungs. The tunnel curved sharply, then widened near a rusted exit grate. "Locked," an operator said. "Breaching," another replied, placing a small charge. Behind them, the enemy was closing fast. Shadows flickered along the tunnel walls. The charge detonated, blowing the grate outward into the night air. Fresh salt wind rushed in. One by one, they emerged onto a rocky shoreline hidden beneath the compound's outer cliff. But as they stepped out, muzzle flashes erupted from above. The enemy had anticipated this exit. Rounds rained down from the cliff edge, forcing them behind scattered boulders. Carter flattened herself against cold stone, scanning for movement. Her drone feed flickered, signal interference. "We're exposed," someone shouted. Hayes assessed quickly. Boats were 200 meters down the coast, open ground between. "Smoke," he commanded. Canisters deployed, filling the shoreline with thick gray cover. "Move on my mark." Carter glanced up through the haze and saw a lone figure repositioning on the cliff, rifle tracking downward. "Tracking Hayes." Her breath caught. "Commander," she started. The smoke shifted in the wind. The rifle steadied, and the shooter squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle cut cleanly through the roar of gunfire and crashing surf. Commander Hayes had just risen from behind the boulder, preparing to signal the final push toward the boats. Through the thinning smoke, the enemy marksman on the cliff had a clear angle. Carter saw it before anyone else. Time didn't slow the way people claimed it did. It sharpened. Every detail became painfully precise. The glint of the rifle scope above, the subtle shift of Hayes' shoulder as he leaned forward, the faint orange flash at the muzzle. She didn't calculate distance. She didn't measure probability. She moved. "Watch out." Her hand slammed into Hayes' chest with every ounce of force she had. The impact knocked him sideways just as the shot rang out. For a split second, she thought she had made it in time. Then something struck her. It didn't feel like in the movies. There was no immediate burst of dramatic pain, just a crushing punch that drove the air from her lungs and spun her backward. The world flipped. Sky, smoke, rock. Then the cold ground met her hard. Sound became distant, muffled as though she were underwater. The team reacted instantly. Sniper high left. Suppressive fire erupted toward the cliff. Two operators repositioned, sending controlled bursts upward. The marksman disappeared from view, either down or forced into cover. Hayes rolled onto his side, momentarily stunned from the shove. He blinked once, then saw Carter on the ground. Blood was spreading fast across the front of her vest. "No," he muttered, already crawling toward her. The shoreline had become a storm of noise again, rifles cracking, smoke drifting, waves smashing against rocks. But Hayes heard none of it clearly. His focus narrowed to Carter's pale face beneath her helmet. "Carter." Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment confusion flickered there, then recognition. "Sir," she breathed faintly. The corpsman was beside them in seconds, sliding in on his knees. "I'm here, I'm here." Hayes pressed a hand against Carter's shoulder as the medic cut through her vest straps. The fabric peeled back, revealing dark red soaking into her uniform. "Entry wound upper torso," the corpsman said rapidly. "Possible exit. I need to roll her." Carter winced as they shifted her carefully. Pain arrived now hot, blinding, impossible to ignore. It radiated through her chest with every heartbeat. Yet somehow she managed a weak smirk. Guess I ruined your dramatic exit, she whispered. Hayes stared at her, disbelief and anger warring behind his eyes. You were supposed to stay behind me. You're welcome, she murmured. Another burst of enemy fire snapped against the rocks nearby. One of the operators shouted, "We're still hot. More movement on the ridge." Hayes forced himself back into command mode. Suppress that ridge, two-man element flank right. The team moved with disciplined aggression, laying down precise fire to push the enemy back from the cliff edge. Smoke thickened again, providing partial cover. The corpsman worked quickly, hands steady despite the chaos. Bullet went through, he said. That's good, less fragmentation, but she's bleeding heavy. Carter's breathing had grown shallow. Each inhale seemed like work. Stay with me, Hayes said firmly, leaning closer. You don't get to check out here. She looked at him through half-lidded eyes. I'm not checking out, she whispered, just taking a break. The medic applied pressure and packed the wound, then started an IV line with swift efficiency. We need medevac now, he said. Hayes keyed his radio. This is Alpha Actual. We have one urgent surgical. Repeat, urgent surgical. Request immediate extraction at Coastal Point Delta. Static crackled back through the earpiece. Extraction bird en route, 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Under fire, it felt like a lifetime. Another explosion thundered above them as an enemy grenade detonated against the rocks, showering debris downward. One operator cursed as shrapnel grazed his arm, but he kept firing. Carter's head shifted slightly toward the sound. Still loud, she muttered weakly. Hayes almost laughed despite himself. You always this chatty after getting shot. She swallowed, fighting dizziness. First time, actually. Her skin was losing color. The medic checked her pulse again. BP's dropping, he warned quietly. Hayes tightened his grip on her hand. Look at me, he ordered softly but firmly. Eyes open. She focused on him with visible effort. You pushed me, he said. Why? Her lips twitched faintly. Because you were standing there like an idiot. Even now, she found a way to joke. Gunfire began to taper off as the SEALs gained the upper position on the ridge. One of the operators signaled down. Cliffs clear. But movement stirred near the compound wall behind them, reinforcements scrambling along the upper edge, searching for angles. We're exposed here, someone called. Hayes made the decision instantly. Form defensive perimeter, protect the casualty. The team tightened around Carter, rifles trained outward in a full protective circle. They became a living shield between her and every threat. Carter's eyes drifted toward the dark ocean beyond the rocks. Did we get him? She asked faintly. Falcon secured, Hayes replied. Mission accomplished. Good, she breathed. The distant thump of helicopter rotors began to echo over the water. Hope surged through the team. But Carter's grip on Hayes' hand weakened. Stay with me, he repeated, voice rougher now. She blinked slowly. You owe me that drink, she whispered. You're collecting it yourself, he said. Her smile returned faint but unmistakable. The helicopter's searchlight cut across the shoreline, illuminating smoke and scattered bodies. Wind whipped violently as the aircraft descended toward the narrow stretch of rocks. The team moved quickly, lifting Carter carefully onto a stretcher while maintaining security. Hayes stayed at her side as they advanced toward the landing zone. Rounds cracked again from distant positions, desperate enemy fire, but it was scattered now, ineffective. They loaded her into the helicopter, as the crew chief waved urgently. Hayes climbed in beside her. As the aircraft lifted off, the shoreline shrank beneath them. Inside the cabin, medics took over, cutting away more fabric, attaching monitors, oxygen mask pressed over her face. Her eyelids fluttered. Sir, she murmured weakly. I'm here, he said immediately. Her fingers twitched faintly against his glove. Still smiling, she managed. And she was. Despite the blood, the pain, the chaos she had just endured, there it was. A stubborn, defiant curve at the corner of her mouth. Then her eyes drifted closed. The medic checked her pulse again. "She's still with us," he confirmed. Hayes exhaled slowly for the first time since the shot was fired. Below them, the ocean disappeared into darkness. Ahead, the distant lights of the medical facility came into view. And for the first time since stepping into the compound, Commander Hayes allowed himself one thought. She had chosen him. And now he had to make sure that choice didn't cost her everything. The helicopter tore through the night sky, its rotors pounding against the heavy ocean air. Inside, the world narrowed to urgency and discipline. Red emergency lights washed over Carter's pale face as the flight medic worked with controlled intensity. "Pulse is thready," the medic said. "BP 80/40 and falling." Hayes stayed on one knee beside the stretcher, gripping the overhead strap with one hand to steady himself as turbulence shook the aircraft. His other hand remained wrapped around Carter's fingers. She was still warm. That mattered. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," he said firmly, leaning close so she could hear him over the roar. "You don't get to rest yet." The oxygen mask fogged slightly as she drew a shallow breath. Her lashes trembled but didn't open. The medic cut away more of her uniform, exposing the packed wound. "Entry upper thoracic, clean exit. She's lucky." Hayes stared at the dark stain spreading through the bandages. "Lucky." It didn't look like luck. Another medic secured additional IV fluids while checking for internal bleeding. "We've got 5 minutes to surgical," one of them called toward the cockpit. Outside, the coastline gave way to the dim outlines of buildings, the forward surgical facility glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Carter stirred faintly. Hayes leaned closer. "Carter." Her lips parted beneath the oxygen mask. "Don't look so serious," she whispered faintly. He almost laughed, but the sound caught somewhere in his chest. "You just took a rifle round for me," he replied quietly. "I'm allowed to be serious." Her mouth twitched beneath the mask. The helicopter banked sharply, descending toward the landing pad. The facility below was already mobilizing, figures running across the concrete, stretcher team waiting. As soon as the aircraft touched down, the rear doors burst open. Cold air rushed inside. "Move, move, move," someone shouted. The stretcher rolled out fast, wheels clattering against metal before hitting smooth pavement. Hayes jumped down beside her, refusing to let go as they sprinted toward the double doors of the trauma unit. Inside, the lighting was blindingly bright. Doctors and nurses converged instantly. "What have we got?" a surgeon demanded. "Female, late 20s, GSW upper torso," the medic reported. "Through and through, hypotensive but responsive in flight." Hands moved quickly, professionally. Monitors were attached. Blood type called out. Consent forms ignored. There was no time for paperwork. Hayes stood just outside the tightening circle of medical staff, feeling strangely useless. They wheeled her toward the operating room without hesitation. A nurse intercepted him gently. "Sir, you'll need to wait here." He nodded stiffly, stepping back as the doors swung closed. The red surgery in progress, light illuminated. And just like that, the noise was gone. The hallway felt too quiet. Minutes earlier, there had been gunfire, explosions, rotor blades. Now there was only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of distant footsteps. Hayes stared at the closed doors. His team began arriving shortly after, escorted from debrief to medical checks. They were bruised, dust-covered, exhausted. "Status?" one operator asked quietly. Hayes didn't look away from the door. "In surgery." No one spoke after that. They lined the hallway wall in silence, not ordered to, not told to. They just stayed. Time stretched. 30 minutes. 45. An hour. Hayes replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The smoke thinning. The rifle lifting. Her voice shouting. The impact. He should have seen it. He should have reacted faster. She made the call before anyone else could. One of the operators said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Hayes exhaled slowly. It wasn't her job. Didn't matter to her, the operator replied. Another hour passed. Finally, the surgical doors opened. Every man in the hallway straightened instinctively. The surgeon stepped out, removing his gloves. There was fatigue in his eyes, but no panic. "She's alive," he said. The words landed heavily. The round missed her heart by less than an inch. Significant blood loss, but we stabilized her. She's critical, but she's stable. Hayes felt his shoulders drop for the first time all night. "Can I see her?" he asked. "In a few minutes." The team remained until Carter was moved to recovery. Only when Hayes gave a quiet nod did they finally disperse to clean up and rest. He didn't leave. When they allowed him into the recovery room, she looked smaller somehow. Machines surrounded the bed. Tubes, wires, monitors blinking steadily. But she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell beneath the hospital gown. Hayes stepped closer to the bed. He wasn't used to this part. He knew how to command under fire. He knew how to clear buildings and call air support. He knew how to stay calm when bullets flew. He didn't know how to stand beside someone who had almost died because of him. He pulled a chair closer and sat. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. "You disobeyed protocol," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. "You moved without clearance." He paused. "And you saved my life." Hours passed. At some point, the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. Dawn crept across the horizon. Carter stirred faintly. Hayes straightened immediately. Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her gaze as she adjusted to the bright lights. She tried to move, winced instead. "Easy," Hayes said gently. Her eyes found him. For a moment she just stared. Then, even through exhaustion and pain, the corner of her mouth lifted. "You look worse than I do," she whispered hoarsely. Relief hit him harder than any explosion. "Not possible," he replied. She swallowed carefully. "We get him. Falcon's in custody." "Good." Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. "You didn't get shot, right?" she asked faintly. "No." "See," she murmured, "worth it." Hayes leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. "You don't get to decide that alone," he said. She studied him weakly. "I saw the angle," she replied. "You didn't." He didn't argue. Because she was right. Her breathing steadied under the monitor's rhythm. "You still owe me," she added softly. "For what?" "That drink." Despite everything, he smiled. "You'll get it." Her eyes drifted closed again, but this time it wasn't from fatting consciousness. It was rest. Outside the room, the base was already waking up. Briefings would begin again. New missions would be planned. The war wouldn't pause. But inside that quiet hospital room, there was a different kind of victory. She had stepped into the line of fire without hesitation. She had smiled through the pain. And she had survived. Hayes remained seated beside her as the morning sun filtered through the window. For the first time since the compound, the tension in his chest eased. She had held the line for him. Now he would hold it for her. The base had returned to motion by mid-morning, but inside the recovery wing, time seemed suspended. The steady beeping of monitors replaced the thunder of gunfire, and the sterile scent of antiseptic erased the smoke of the battlefield. Lieutenant Emily Carter slept through most of the day. Commander Hayes hadn't moved far from the chair beside her bed. He had changed uniforms. He had given his debrief. He had reported the successful capture of Falcon and the ambush that followed. But when protocol allowed him to leave, he came straight back. The team had taken shifts checking in. Each one paused at the doorway, eyes lingering just long enough to confirm she was still breathing before stepping away quietly. She wasn't officially one of them, but she was now. Late that afternoon, Carter stirred again. Her brow furrowed slightly before her eyes opened. The confusion returned first, the bright lights, the ceiling tiles, the faint hum of machines. Then the memory hit. Her hand moved instinctively toward her chest. Payne answered immediately. "Easy," Hayes said, rising halfway from his chair. Her gaze shifted toward him slowly. Recognition followed. "Still here?" she asked, voice rough. "Last I checked." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. A sharp breath escaped her. "Doctor said no heroics," Hayes added. She managed a faint smirk. "That's ironic." A nurse entered briefly to check her vitals, adjust her IV, and remind her not to move too much. Carter listened politely but impatiently, like someone enduring a delay rather than recovering from major trauma. When the nurse left, silence settled again. "You shouldn't have been that exposed," Hayes said finally. She looked at him carefully. "Neither should you." "That's different." "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't have one. Outside the room, muffled footsteps passed in the hallway. A distant intercom announcement echoed briefly and faded. "You're the commander," she continued quietly. "You go down, the mission fractures." "And you going down does," he countered. She held his gaze. "For the record," she said softly, "I didn't calculate it." "What did you do?" "I reacted." That answer lingered between them. Hayes studied her for a moment, pale but steady, weakened but defiant. "You saw it before anyone else," he said. "That sniper." "I saw the angle," she replied. "He had elevation and a clear line. You were mid-step." "You could have shouted." "I did," she said faintly. "You weren't going to move fast enough." He exhaled through his nose. She wasn't wrong. A shadow crossed her face as fatigue crept back in. Pain medication dulled the sharp edges, but it couldn't erase the memory entirely. "Did we lose anyone?" she asked quietly. "No." The word came quickly. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good." There was something about that, something unspoken. She hadn't stepped forward because of orders or obligation. She had stepped forward because she refused to watch another teammate fall. A soft knock interrupted them. One of Hayes' senior operators stepped into the doorway. Dust still clung faintly to his boots. "Ma'am," he said with a nod, "you scared the hell out of us." Carter's mouth curved faintly. "Wasn't my intention." He stepped closer to the bed. "Cliff's sniper didn't make it." She nodded once. "Mission intel turned out solid," he added. "Falcon's already being interrogated. That shipment's dead." "Then it was worth it," she murmured. The operator hesitated, then spoke more quietly. "You didn't hesitate out there." She shrugged slightly, wincing at the motion. "You wouldn't have either." He gave a small smile. "No, ma'am, guess not." After he left, the room grew quiet again. Outside, the sky began shifting toward evening. Golden light filtered through the blinds, painting faint stripes across the floor. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "You know this changes things," he said. "How?" "You're going to be recommended for a valor commendation." Her expression didn't brighten. "I don't want a medal." "That's not the point." "It shouldn't be," she replied softly. He studied her again. She wasn't chasing recognition. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She had simply acted. "Do you regret it?" he asked. The question hung heavy in the air. Carter looked down at the blanket covering her, at the bandages beneath it, at the IV line taped to her arm. Then she looked back at him. No. There wasn't even a flicker of doubt. "You do it again," he pressed. Her smile returned faint but stubborn. "If you're still standing in the open like that, absolutely." For the first time since the compound, Hayes let out a genuine, quiet laugh. The tension in the room eased slightly. Night settled outside the window. A doctor entered briefly to discuss recovery. The bullet had narrowly missed major arteries. There would be physical therapy. Weeks, possibly months, before she could return to full duty. Carter listened carefully. "When can I stand?" she asked. The doctor blinked. "You were shot less than 24 hours ago." "I'm aware." "Let's focus on breathing first," the doctor replied gently. After he left, Hayes shook his head slightly. "You're impossible." "I've been told." Fatigue finally began overtaking her again. Her eyelids grew heavier. "Sir," she said quietly. "Yes." "When it happened, I wasn't scared." He didn't interrupt. "I was just certain," she continued faintly, "certain you weren't going to see it in time." He absorbed that. "You don't have to carry that alone," he said. She looked at him through half-closed eyes. "I know." Her breathing steadied as sleep pulled her under once more. Hayes remained in the chair long after. Outside, the base lights flickered on across the compound. Helicopters lifted into the night sky again. Somewhere, another mission was already unfolding. War didn't pause for anyone. But inside that quiet hospital room, something had shifted. She had stepped into the line of fire without hesitation. She had smiled through blood and chaos. And even now, lying in recovery, she showed no trace of regret. Hayes looked at her one last time before standing. "You held the line," he murmured quietly. And for the first time since the bullet was fired, the weight on his chest felt just slightly lighter. Recovery was not dramatic. There were no explosions, no shouted commands, no flashing muzzle fire cutting through darkness. There was only pain, slow, stubborn, and constant. 2 weeks after surgery, Lieutenant Emily Carter stood between parallel bars in the rehabilitation wing, jaw clenched, as she forced her legs to steady beneath her. "Slow," the physical therapist reminded her. "Your body's still compensating." "I'm aware," she muttered. The scar along her upper torso burned with each shallow breath. The bullet had missed her heart, but it had torn muscle, fractured a rib, and left nerves angry and inflamed. Across the room, Commander Hayes stood with his arms folded, watching. Not hovering. Watching. She took another step. Her legs trembled, but she didn't fall. "That's enough for today," the therapist said firmly. Carter stopped reluctantly. "It's not." "It is." Hayes stepped forward quietly as she released the bars. "You don't have to win rehab," he said. She shot him a look. "I'm not trying to win." "Looks like it." A faint smirk tugged at her mouth despite the exhaustion. "Is that concern, sir?" "It's experience," he replied evenly. "You push too hard, you delay recovery." She adjusted the edge of her medical brace and took a careful breath. "I don't like sitting still." "I know." That was the problem. The team was scheduled for redeployment within the month. She knew it. Everyone knew it. And though no one said it directly, the unspoken question lingered in every hallway conversation. Would she be ready? That evening, she sat outside on a bench overlooking the base airstrip. The sky was painted in deep orange and violet as the sun dipped low. Helicopters lifted off in the distance, silhouettes cutting across the fading light. Hayes approached without announcing himself and sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're not cleared," he said finally. "Yet." Even when you are, you won't be combat ready immediately. She stared ahead at the aircraft rising into the sky. You think I can't do it? I think you nearly died. She turned to him then. I didn't. That wasn't your decision. It was, she said quietly. I chose to move. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of fuel and warm desert dust. Hayes exhaled slowly. You don't get to make that choice again, without understanding what it does to the rest of us. Her expression softened just a fraction. I know, she said. And she did, because she had seen their faces on the shoreline. The fear, the anger, the refusal to let her go. That night sleep didn't come easily. The moment replayed again, the smoke thinning, the rifle lifting, the split-second calculation. But this time, she didn't see herself stepping forward. She saw Hayes' expression when he reached her on the rocks. That unsettled her more than the gunshot. Morning came early. By the third week, she could walk without assistance, slowly, carefully, but upright. The first time she entered the team's training bay again, conversation stopped. Operators looked up from weapon maintenance and paused mid-sentence. Not out of pity, out of recognition. She walked in without ceremony. Thought I'd check if you were all behaving, she said. A few grins broke across hardened faces. You sure you're allowed in here? One asked. Probably not, she replied. Hayes watched from across the room. There was no announcement, no speech. Just a quiet reintegration. She didn't train that day, she observed, listened, took notes. Her instincts were as sharp as ever. But when one of the operators ran a close-quarters drill too aggressively and left himself exposed on a corner, she spoke up immediately. You'd be dead. He blinked. She pointed to the blind angle. You lost sight of your secondary threat. He adjusted without argument. Hayes noticed. She might not have been physically whole yet. But mentally, she had never been sharper. Weeks passed. Scars healed into firm lines beneath the surface of her skin. Strength returned slowly. Then came the clearance evaluation. The base physician studied her chart, then looked up at her carefully. You've exceeded recovery projections. I don't like losing, she replied. He almost smiled. You're cleared for limited duty. She nodded once. Limited wasn't permanent. That evening, she returned to the airstrip bench. Hayes joined her again. Limited duty, she said before he could speak. I heard. She looked at the horizon. That means I'm coming. It means you're attached, he corrected. Observation, advisory role. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. That's what I've always done. He gave her a look. You know what I mean. She did. He wasn't questioning her courage. He was protecting her. And maybe himself. Sir, she said quietly, if you're worried I'll jump in front of another bullet. I am, he interrupted. She considered that. The sky darkened gradually, stars beginning to break through the fading light. I won't hesitate, she said honestly. That's what concerns me. She turned to face him fully now. You can't lead from fear, she said. I don't. You are right now. The words hung heavy between them. A helicopter thundered overhead, drowning the silence for a moment. When it passed, Hayes spoke quietly. You're part of this team. I know. And when you went down, every one of them felt it. She absorbed that. She had thought about the mission, the ambush, the success. She hadn't fully allowed herself to think about what her fall had done to them. I don't regret it, she said. I know, he replied. That was the problem. Deployment day arrived faster than expected. Gear bags lined the tarmac once more. Engines roared to life. Carter stood in partial combat gear, lighter loadout, advisory patch secured to her vest. Not full combat status, but not sidelined either. Hayes approached her before boarding. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Always." He studied her for a moment. The scar would never fully fade. Neither would the memory. But she stood steady, strong, still smiling faintly under the weight of what she had survived. The ramp lowered. The team boarded. As the helicopter lifted into the sky again, Carter looked out over the coastline below. Last time she had left that shoreline on a stretcher. This time she was upright, breathing, ready. And somewhere deep inside, she knew something had changed. She had taken a bullet for her commander. But what truly held the line wasn't the act. It was what came after. The trust, the weight, the unspoken bond forged under fire. As the aircraft disappeared into the night once more, one thing was certain. If darkness rose again, she wouldn't hesitate. But this time she wouldn't stand alone. The second deployment felt different. Not because the mission had changed. Hostile terrain was still hostile terrain. But because every man on that aircraft carried the memory of the shoreline with him. And so did she. The helicopter flew low across mountainous terrain this time, far from the coast where she had fallen. The landscape below was jagged and unforgiving, scattered with isolated compounds and winding dirt roads barely visible under moonlight. Inside the cabin, red lights cast familiar shadows. Carter sat upright, secured in her harness. Her gear was lighter, her clearance technically limited, but no one treated her as fragile. They just watched her differently. Hayes caught her studying the live drone feed again. "You're clear to advise," he reminded her quietly. "Always do," she replied. Their objective was a weapons transfer occurring in a remote mountain village. Smaller target, lower expected resistance. But no one believed that anymore. The ramp lowered, cold mountain air rushed in. They descended fast. Boots hit dirt. Formation locked. The village was quiet, two quiet adobe walls casting long, silent shadows. Carter monitored thermal signatures through her handheld display. 3 heat sources inside the main building, she whispered. 1 stationary, 2 moving. Hayes signaled forward movement. They approached with disciplined stealth, weapons raised, scanning rooftops and alleyways. Every sound felt amplified, a distant dog barking, wind scraping against loose metal, the faint crunch of gravel under boots. Inside her chest, her scar tightened slightly as adrenaline built. Not fear. Memory. They reached the outer wall of the target structure. Hayes crouched beside her briefly. "You good?" he asked. She met his eyes evenly. "I'm here." He nodded once. Breaching charge placed. 3, 2, 1. The door blew inward. The team flowed through the opening like controlled water, clearing corners with mechanical precision. Shots fired inside brief, contained. 2 armed men dropped. The third attempted to flee through a rear exit. Carter's voice cut through comms instantly. "Rear alley moving fast." An operator intercepted before the man cleared the threshold. Within seconds, the structure was secure. Hayes moved into the central room. Weapons crates stacked along the wall, documents spread across a table, radios crackling. "Package confirmed," he said. The mission was proceeding cleanly. Too cleanly. Carter's instincts stirred again. She scanned the thermal overlay. "Commander," she said quietly, "heat bloom outside the eastern perimeter. Multiple." "How many?" 6, no 8. Before he could respond, gunfire erupted from outside. Rounds tore into the outer wall, splintering plaster. "Contact east," someone shouted. The team shifted immediately into defensive positions. They were waiting for confirmation, Carter realized. We triggered the signal. Enemy fighters surged into the courtyard, attempting to box them in. Hayes issued orders with calm precision. Two-man team on rear suppression, smoke on exit route, we exfil north. Carter moved toward a side window, checking angles. The scar along her torso burned faintly, but she ignored it. Outside, chaos unfolded quickly. The enemy had numbers and elevation from nearby rooftops. One operator went down hard behind a low wall, hit in the leg. "Man down," he called. Without thinking, Carter shifted toward the doorway. Hayes caught her arm firmly. "Negative," he said sharply. "I can reach him," she replied. "Stay in advisory." Another burst of gunfire snapped past the entrance. The wounded operator tried to crawl, but couldn't gain traction. Hayes signaled two men to lay suppressive fire. The courtyard exploded with noise. Carter assessed angles rapidly. "There's a blind dip 2 meters left of him," she said quickly. "If he rolls left, he's covered." Hayes relayed instantly. The operator dragged himself sideways under covering fire, disappearing into the shallow depression. Two teammates reached him seconds later and pulled him back inside. The team regrouped quickly. Carter's breathing was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From restraint. Hayes noticed. "You moved," he said quietly once the room stabilized. "I advised. You were about to go." She didn't deny it. Outside, the gunfire began to thin as the team gained tactical advantage. Smoke filled the courtyard, blurring enemy sightlines. "Extraction point 200 meters north," Hayes ordered. They moved as a unit, carrying the wounded operator between them. Carter stayed close, scanning rooftops and alleys, feeding updates continuously. "Left rooftop clear. 2 hostiles moving right alley, adjust." The team adapted seamlessly. They reached the extraction zone just as the helicopter thundered overhead. Dust and debris swirled violently as it descended. The wounded operator was loaded first. Then the rest followed. Carter climbed aboard last. As the helicopter lifted, the village shrank below them, another flashpoint fading into darkness. Inside the cabin, adrenaline slowly drained away. The wounded operator grinned weakly from his stretcher. "Told you I'd make it," he muttered. Carter allowed herself a small smile. Hayes watched her carefully. "You held," he said quietly over the headset. She knew what he meant. She hadn't broken formation. Hadn't stepped blindly into fire. Hadn't repeated the shoreline. "I learned," she replied. He studied her for a moment. "You didn't lose your edge." "Didn't plan to." The helicopter banked toward base. As the noise settled into steady rhythm, Carter leaned back against the interior wall. Her scar ached, but not the way it had before. It was no longer a reminder of vulnerability. It was a marker, a line she had crossed and returned from. Hayes moved to sit across from her. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not proving," she answered. "I'm adjusting." The red cabin lights flickered softly across determined faces. The team was intact. Mission successful. No fatalities. As the base lights came into view in the distance, Carter felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief. Balance. She had stepped into death once without hesitation. Now she had stood on the edge again and chosen discipline. The helicopter touched down smoothly. As they disembarked, Hayes paused beside her. "You're ready," he said simply. She looked toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to break faintly over the mountains. "I never stopped being ready," she replied. And this time when she smiled, it wasn't defiance. It was control. The ceremony was small. No press, no cameras, just a cleared-out hangar on base, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a podium positioned beneath the American flag. The team stood in formation at the front, uniforms pressed, boots polished, expressions steady. Lieutenant Emily Carter stood at attention beside Commander Hayes. The scar beneath her dress uniform itched faintly, a quiet reminder hidden under fabric and metals. She ignored it. The commanding officer read the citation clearly, his voice carrying across the silent hangar. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life, above and beyond the call of duty. The words sounded distant to her. She wasn't thinking about gallantry. She was thinking about smoke on the shoreline, about the split-second decision, about the sound of Hayes' voice calling her name. Lieutenant Carter deliberately placed herself in the line of fire to shield a fellow service member from imminent threat. She hadn't felt brave in that moment. She had felt certain. The medal was pinned carefully against her uniform. Applause followed, restrained but sincere. When the ceremony ended, the formation broke into something more human. Handshakes, quiet congratulations, a few claps on the shoulder. One of the operators leaned in slightly. "Still owe you that drink," he muttered. She smirked. "I'll collect." Across the hangar, Hayes watched her. Not with guilt anymore. With recognition. Later that evening, the team gathered at a modest off-base bar, the kind with worn wooden tables and a jukebox that hadn't been updated in years. It wasn't an official event. Just tradition. Carter sat among them, a glass of water in front of her despite the teasing. "Doctor's orders," she said. "You got shot and you're still following rules," someone joked. "Don't push it," she replied lightly. The laughter was easy. Not forced. They didn't talk about the bullet directly. They didn't need to. It had become part of the unit's history, like every mission that shaped them. Hayes eventually took the empty seat beside her. "You going to give a speech?" she asked. "No." "Good." He studied her for a moment. "You handled the mountain op well." "So did you." "That's not what I meant." She understood. "You were watching me," she said. "Yes." "To see if I'd do it again." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "And you didn't." She leaned back slightly. "I'm not reckless." "I know." There was a pause. "I was never reckless," she added quietly. Hayes didn't argue. He had replayed that shoreline moment more times than he could count. From every angle, the conclusion stayed the same. She had made the only move that would have worked. And she had paid for it. "You changed the team," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "How?" "They move tighter now, cover angles more carefully. Nobody stands exposed longer than they have to." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Good." "They also watch you," he added. Her brow lifted slightly. "Why?" "Because you proved you'd step forward." She didn't answer right away. That wasn't something she had done for attention. But she understood what it meant. Trust ran deeper when tested under fire. Months passed. Deployments came and went. Operations blurred together, villages, coastlines, night insertions, extraction zones. The scar faded from angry red to pale silver. Carter regained full combat clearance. The first time she suited up in full gear again, there were no speeches. Just quiet readiness. Before one mission briefing, Hayes paused the room. He looked at the team, then at her. "Standard operation," he said. "No heroics." A few subtle grins appeared. Carter crossed her arms. "I don't do heroics," she said evenly. "You tackled a commander into gunfire," one operator muttered. She shot him a look. "You're welcome." The room relaxed, but beneath the humor was something solid. They trusted her, not because she had taken a bullet, but because she had come back from it without letting it define her. One night, after a successful operation that ended cleanly and quietly, Carter stood alone on the edge of the base perimeter. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the wire, lit faintly by moonlight. Boots approached from behind. She didn't turn. "You're supposed to be resting," Hayes said. "So are you." He stepped beside her, looking out across the open land. For a while they stood in silence. "You ever think about that night?" he asked finally. "Yes." "Regret anything?" She considered that carefully. "I regret that you blame yourself," she said. He didn't respond. "You were doing your job," she continued. "So was I. You weren't ordered to move." "No," she agreed, "I was." Wind shifted across the sand, cool against their faces. "I don't want you stepping into bullets for me again," he said quietly. She looked at him now. "You don't get to decide that," she replied calmly. His jaw tightened slightly. "But," she added, "I also don't plan on giving you the opportunity." That earned the smallest hint of a smile. The tension eased. "Why were you smiling?" he asked suddenly. She tilted her head. "On the shoreline," he clarified, "you were bleeding out and you were smiling." She thought about it. The memory was sharp, the rocks, the noise, his voice. "I wasn't smiling because it didn't hurt," she said softly. "I was smiling because you were still standing." He absorbed that. "And because I knew," she added, "if the roles were reversed, you wouldn't hesitate either." He didn't deny it. They both understood something simple and dangerous about each other. Loyalty that deep wasn't strategic. It was instinctive. The base lights flickered behind them as another helicopter prepared for departure somewhere in the distance. "You're part of this team," Hayes said again. "I know. No matter what." She nodded once. The smile returned, not dramatic, not defiant. Just steady. It was the same smile she wore on the stretcher. The same one that unsettled medics and frustrated commanders. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had never been the deciding factor. As they turned back toward the operations building, the war continued beyond the horizon. Missions would rise and fall. Threats would evolve. But one thing had been cemented on a dark shoreline under enemy fire. She had stepped into danger without hesitation. She had smiled through the worst of it. And she had come back stronger. The story wouldn't be remembered for the bullet alone. It would be remembered for the choice. And for the smile that never left, even when everything else nearly did.